bribe the people here at the neighborhood meetings with food.
And booze.
Oh, well, you admitted it. Can't forget that. And no, he's president of the neighborhood association. But that's sort of like mayor, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So he's going to do a great job. And what's fun is you're going to stop at the gallery at the end, and there's another stop along the way. It's an interesting part of town. It's one that needs some attention, and this is one way to do it because there are still great resources here. And you know, fun, good things happen. Like this was recently restored. It was a community effort. I think many of you know what this was. It belonged to the Jewish temple here.
Oh,
And Washington Avenue Jewish Temple. In fact, it was a whole temple complex. Across the street was built for some of the members of the synagogue, so they could observe the Sabbath coming over here, and they would not have to drive because observe the Sabbath. So, anybody need a brochure for
Washington Avenue District Tour last year? Remembered it was a long tour. So this one's shortened. We will end up a half block up the street here at Billy Heddle's Gallery. And when we get there, you will be invited in to see the current show, purchase art if you want to. We'll have some hospitality. And then when you leave there, you can come to this beautiful Queen Anne home across the street here. That is home to the Allen family and their business called Soap Solutions, and they're going to be open from 8 to 9 as well. So you'll be able to get a tour of a lot of the rooms of both of these historic homes. We are standing here in what used to be the sanctuary of the Washington Avenue Temple. This tower is the last remaining architectural remnant of Jewish houses of worship in the city of Evansville. It was designed by a firm called Harris and Shotbell, and you'll hear the name Clifford Shotbell quite a lot on these tours throughout Preservation Month because he was a very important Evansville architect. Now, Collegiate Gothic is essentially a 19th, early 20th century cleaned up version of Old Gothic, like Oxford gone 20th century. The U of E campus is a classic example of Collegiate Gothic. Now, Shotbell designed another church down the street here, the old Washington Avenue Temple made of yellow brick. Now it's called, I think, God's Way Church. He designed that church as well. Now, the congregation before moving here was at 6th and Court Streets, and it was enabled to move here by a large gift from Major Albert Rosencrantz, who was a very prominent figure. He also helped to finance the Washington Court Apartments and the Rosencrantz apartment building, which no longer stands anymore, but was once up the street, and I'll show you where that was. Shotbell, by the way, also designed the Coliseum, the YMCA, the Masonic Temple, and both Wrights High Schools. Now, when the Washington Avenue Temple merged with the Temple Adath Israel, the old synagogue was sold to Patchwork Central in 1980. 3 years after Patchwork moved in, a fire destroyed almost everything but the facades of the two buildings and the old education wing over there. But the original temple and sanctuary were destroyed. So what Patchwork decided to do was to save, and these were never really towers, they were tower extensions on the front that were actually attached to the facades. So what they did was they took the remnants of the smaller tower and they used those to reconstruct a complete tower here as a memorial, remembrance. And today it's the most important landmark in Blackford Grove and one of the most important ones in the Washington Avenue Historic District. The sanctuary area is dedicated as a sanctuary garden. Patchwork decided not to build in this part of the property. The tower was first rededicated in 1986. And last year, Patchwork, as Dennis said, won the Preservation Alliance Award. They spent a significant amount of money to stabilize and rehabilitate this tower, so it's going to be good for another 100 years. And for those of you who are not familiar with Patchwork, it is a faith-based, not-for-profit. I think of it as sitting on three stools: hospitality, art, and service. And in the middle of June, they are going to be giving tours of their extensive art collection inside the building. But for now, why don't we walk around a little bit. I want to show you just a sampling of some of the art that's on, outdoor art that's on the campus, and show you the next building on our stop. Of all ages and from all different economic groups. And one of the things they do a lot of is work with salvaged and found materials. They were doing green eco stuff for over 3 decades here. But this is one of the projects this is several years old at this point. 1993. Even the trash cans are decorated. That was a project from last year to dress up the trash containers on the property. Let's go around this recycled bicycles. That has been around quite a bit and has seen a lot of service. Behind you is the Washington Court Apartments. Dennis mentioned that apartment complex earlier. That's not actually part of Blackford Grove, but it was in terrible shape several decades ago and is now an Evansville Housing Authority building for people needing supportive services and things like that. But it was the very first apartment house in Evansville to have a carriage courtway in the middle, which you'll see in just a moment. Automobile age. So I really don't think the court was intended for horses and carriages. I think that was for the early automobiles.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and they did a really nice restoration. Behind me here is the John Rosenberger house. It's an example of Queen Anne, which I'll talk more about later. You can't see a lot of what makes it a Queen Anne because it has been covered up with aluminum siding. Now, aluminum siding is not always such a nasty thing because often it was placed over good material back in the day when people just didn't want to mess with it, and when that is taken off, what is underneath has been pretty well preserved. So, but some of the things that make it a Queen Anne are turrets and towers, elliptical windows, eyebrow windows, a very, complicated roof line, all sorts of different roofs tucked together, things protruding out of the corners. You'll see that this tower here on the corner is not a full-length tower. It comes out over the second floor. The original spindle columns are no longer there on the front porch, but I imagine that you would get a thrill out of going inside because you will see all this beautiful, fully restored woodwork and floors. And right now the ground floor is used as a community grocery store. It's like going to the old village store, and then there is an apartment above. We're returning to the days of living above the store, and that's one of the models, one of the ideas for regenerating the arts district, is to have these home-based or small businesses that can combine a small shop or gallery with the residents. The Rosenberger house, to give you an idea of the mixture of people who lived in Blackford Grove throughout the years, I'm going to tell you some of the people who lived in these various houses. John Rosenberger, it was built for him. He was an ordinary businessman. In 1929, a three-term congressman named Harry E. Rowbottom bought it and lived here. It was also once occupied by Anna Malos, who was the widow of Republican Mayor Herbert Malos. He served from 1926 to 1930. So, let's go see a little bit more of the art, and then we're going to head toward what I call the Street of Little Houses, and we'll talk about vernacular architecture or the architecture of the common man.
Giant insect.
And they're pictures. These were made by one of the patchwork artists with the children as a summer-long project. And then, of course, we have a ceramic studio back here. This is where a lot of the kiln firing and painting and work of that nature is done. And then we'll come back through here over there. And you probably noticed the basketball backboard is done with mosaic. This area right here is called the Meditation Garden. You see that Hansel and Gretel oven back there. It's actually a working outdoor bread oven. They make bread and pizza in there. And every year the children in the summer program come and add to the mosaic decorations back here. And of course, bushels and bushels of vegetables are grown here every year as well. As we're walking along the way, I'll also be pointing out Garden Grove runs from Parrott, which becomes Southeast 4th Street. So that is that edge over there. The eastern edge is Southeast 8, Martin Luther King. The northern boundary is Mulberry Street, and the southern boundary is Washington Avenue. That's the present-day Blackford Grove neighborhood. Now, the Blackford Grove, for which this area is named, the orchard, that tract of land, actually ran from Washington to Powell, from Parrott to Garvin. So parts of what were the old Blackford Grove orchard are now in different neighborhoods, and we picked up some parts of another neighborhood. But
Apple or peach or what kind of
I'm
orchard
not
do you
sure.
have?
They're just the records are described as a grove, a pleasure grove. So there must have been, and there were. This area was truck farms for the city before it kept extending around. So, and it was an investment that Judge Blackford owned. He never lived here. This whole area was first purchased by Robert Evans's land speculation, and of course people see that on their title, change of title, and they think, oh, founder of Evansville lived in my house. Well, that's not true. He just owned your piece of dirt a long time ago. So neither Evans nor Blackford ever lived in this area. And I'll talk more about them in a little while. But we're going to talk about vernacular architecture right now. Vernacular simply means the everyday things that we use, the everyday speech that we use. And vernacular housing is what most people in the country live in. Whether it's a ranch house, a bungalow, or some other thing, whatever is the prevailing house type of the time. Now, in the late 19th century to early 20th century, there were several house types that were really common. You notice that we have a lot of very fine, fancy houses that were obviously built by people with money. But in between and interspersed throughout, you have small, modest houses. So, in a way, the present-day historical the economic mix of today, this is very much a mixed-income neighborhood, is like it was when it was first settled. It was not like a lot of neighborhoods today where you have only people of your economic class living around you. That's one of the things, of course, that makes city living center city living more interesting to those of us who are really into it. But the house behind me is what is called a T-plan house. This one over here is also a T-plan. It's actually a double house. The building records say that these houses were built about 1880. I have a bit of discrepancy because I have other records that show that Blackford Grove, this area wasn't really developed until 1885, but I have the feeling that there was some off-lot and micro-development going on in the years just before it really took off. Let me tell you a little bit about this type of house. Find my proper notes here. Now, sometimes the T-plan is called a Victorian cross transept. And basically, if you look at it from the air, it makes a T or a Latin cross. You know, a traditional Christian cross or just the square. In a lot of ways, it's similar to the Queen Anne style, which we'll talk about later. But there always is a porch involved. The number of bays, and a bay is simply an opening, whether it's a window or a door, is either 3 or 4, and they're set with some kind of symmetry. And what makes it a cross T is that if you look at the sides here, you'll see that they bump out just one window, one bay out on each side. That just gives you a little more space in there. Sometimes there are porches tucked in on the sides like there are right here. But very simple type of house. These are very common throughout the old neighborhoods down here. And this one, of course, is in need of rehabbing. It's slowly being done. Until the blighted houses were torn down during the past couple of years, every lot here was practically filled, and they were all little houses of this size. During the years, there was some infill with some modern bungalows and ranch houses, as you see here. Those were built before the city changed the zoning code. At the time those were built, every house in the city had to be set back 36 feet from the front lot, no matter where it was. We worked many years to get them to change the zoning, so now you can set back as little as 10 feet from the edge of the curb here to the front of the house, which is what was traditional to this area. So that was a big help. I wanted to point out 31 East Blackford here. It is a simple vernacular house, gable fronted. One of you said, did they do remodeling on this house since I was on the tour last year? And I said, yes, they have. The young couple have restored this little house, and one of the things that's interesting about it and the Queen Anne house across the street, which is owned by a resident of the neighborhood, he rents this out to a young couple, is that they used very ordinary common materials, vinyl siding, vinyl windows, all of that, but they used them in creative ways. Putting fish scales on there, using a different color of siding, doing a little bit of paint. They've done it on a modest budget, but yet turned out something that is very tasteful and respectful of the house. But this one, Joe and Amy have done an exceptional job, and what they've done on the front here, they've also done on the back as well. But they threw in one little thing that makes it different and that I really like, and there's a school of restoration that says that anything that's new, that's not a complete restoration to what it was in the original, should be known to be new. And this pillar right here on the porch, and they have one on the back, is a bit oversized. It's not the shape or circumference that it would have been. But they use these oversized pillars, and it somehow gives this pop, a postmodern look to it or whatever. So They also maintain this little gable-fronted house here. These are very close to being shotgun houses. We don't have any shotgun houses left. But in terms of future redevelopment, this is the type of street, these are the types of little lots where the city would like to see people begin to build live-work situations like we have at our place and which you'll see at Soap Solutions. And at our gallery, we have plans that a young man who lived in the neighborhood for a while drew up for a small house on a narrow lot down here. He actually designed it with this vacant lot right down here in mind. So let's go back this way. A prime example of the Queen Anne style. Queen Anne, when I say a Victorian house, what kind of house comes to mind? This kind of house, something like this. And you think of a Victorian era house, this usually think of Queen Anne. Painted ladies, they're often called when they're painted up. This is the kind of genteel house that you imagine when you're reading Southern literature or something. Now this is the big sister of Queen Anne. The yellow house where we'll be ending our tour is called a Queen Anne cottage. Yeah. And I'll explain the difference between the two, but this is the big sister, Queen Anne, and that's the little sister, Queen Anne. But the Mary Ferguson house here, and we'll go around the front in a moment, was built in 1890. It was designed by Frank Schlatter, that architect that we talked about before. Schlatter was an Evansville native. He apprenticed with the Reed brothers. His business was wide-ranging. He did houses and to commercial structures. Anyone who is familiar with the grotto at St. Boniface Church, that is his design. As was the old Central High School tower. Any old Central High School grads here? And also he was the supervising architect during the construction of the old courthouse and was very popular in Evansville for his American four-square houses. And we'll see an example of one of those later. But this house has all of the features that you need for St. Anne. Lots of complex forms, elements, different styles mixed into it. Facades and roofs are very complicated. Towers are common. Actually, I think towers are essential to this style. You have bay windows, cutaway corners. You'll find those more on my house. Those are the cutaway corners are the ones that are supported then by those elaborate brackets, ornate brackets. Tall chimneys, elaborate chimneys are another defining characteristic, and also the exterior wall treatments. You have siding, this kind of drop siding that's carved out in between here, mixed in with fishtail or with different kinds of designs. Sometimes you'll see things that are cut in angular or diamond shapes. When we get around the corner, you'll see that the front porch is supported by very elaborate carved spindle posts, and those in turn are painted in complicated colors. So, this is a good example of Queen Anne, and let's take a moment to walk around it and look at it a little more closely. On top of this tower, when it was built, it had an onion top dome on top of that to complete it. Imagine that. That was lost. But again, you see all these complicated features on the facade. One thing that makes this very, very nice are these very heavy, oversized spindles. I guess maybe this might be why I like those oversized columns on the little house on Blackford. In a way, it is historical. But when you're up here, when you come back here later, the feeling of being on the porch. This is the quintessence. This is a family home. And the nice thing about these old houses is that many of us are finding that they are ideal if you have the type of business that you want to or can work from home. You save a lot of overhead. Your insurance is at residential rates because your property is still a residential property. So there are a number of, Mary Allen opened this just last year. We have 2 or 3 other places that are supposed to be coming online in the next year. So watch for more development down here. Well, I've got some
Deep porch on
competition
second
out
floor.
here. A double gallery house, meaning a house that has a porch that runs across both stories. It was converted to apartments in 1920, although the county survey listed as a Queen Anne house built in 1898. Let's go on down here, get away from the dog. But we're going to pass 3 newly built homes. This yellow one right here, the one next door to it, and then there is a brick one on further down. These are really good examples of the types of homes that the city has been built through some initiatives and now has gotten the neighborhood to the point that we have private developers looking to come in and build types of houses like this with their own money. But the important thing about new construction in a historic neighborhood, I believe the two are very much compatible. And I believe that really modern, contemporary designs can fit with old houses just as well as things that try to replicate historic styles. But siding, massing, the setback from the street, and the materials that are used are the most critical things. And these houses were very successful here because they paid attention to all of those things. I like how this one picks up the echo of its neighbor's double gallery. This one is maybe a bit of a mix of styles, but it has the various facade treatments, the shingles and things. And then the brick one at the end of the block is your classic American four-square house, built 100 years later. Of course, these are all built with contemporary floor plans inside.
Hello.
They are green. The energy bills on these are supposedly under $100 a month.
Wow.
So they were built to be sustainable housing, and they've been a real asset to the neighborhood. So let's continue down. Yes, these are the Rudolph Haas house. It's a gable-ended house. The gable means it has a triangle up the front. It's the kind of gable-ended house is the kind of house we all first learned to draw when we were little kids. It was built in 1898, and what it does is it incorporates features from things that were popular at the time. You see that it had fancy woodwork and things like that on a relatively simple house. Had a nice door, but it starts to become a little bit restrained. But you see it has a protruding side, it has a setback porch. Mr. Haas was the founder of the Haas department store, which was located at 409 Main Street. He emigrated here from southern Germany at the age of 13. The Postal Waste received a Preservation Alliance Award for their renovation of this house back in 2007. As we pass by, notice the garden that they keep on the side and these huge water cisterns, which they use to collect rainwater to water their garden with.
Wow.
It's really I don't know.
Now look at the chimney work on the side of that. American Foursquare. Later on we'll see some Foursquares from 100 years ago. Hello. But the American Foursquare became popular in 1910, was popular all the way into the 40s. It looks like a big square box, doesn't it? It's always 2 stories tall, at least 2 stories, 3 or 4 bays wide, a bay being the opening. So this one we have 3. Hip roofs are usually favored. This one has a hip roof. Dormer windows are often prominent. This one incorporates a dormer window. Broad eaves. I think that we have fairly broad eaves. And then you have the porch, which usually traverse the entire front of the facade. This is really a classic family home, very comfortable. That's why they still are very popular. But again, when constructing these new buildings, they pick up some interesting things like the pillars right here. This is the kind of basic shape that you will find on bungalows and pillars of houses that were built during that period. So they introduced that shape back in, and that's what makes it work. Now, before we go on up to Perrette Street, I want to turn around and talk about this Art Moderne apartment building across the street. It was built in 1940. It does have a really nice aluminum canopy that goes over the front, curved. I hope they put that back. This is going to be the management office and community center for a 40-home project that was recently built in the neighborhood south of Washington called Homes of Evansville. They are houses like this, of this quality, which people are able to rent and then eventually will be able to buy them. So there's a lot of work going on right now to repopulate this area with people of all income groups. And it's finally reached the point where things are starting to be able to support market rate housing, which is a good thing for the entire city.
So it's going to be a community center?
Yes, they're going to have a meeting room where they can have, say, workshops on home ownership, classes on things like that, tenants meetings, social events, and I understand that they may have some kind of a computer lab for people to come in and get assistance with whatever. I'm not sure. There's going to be an open house soon. We'll find out more then. Okay, let's go down the back of the original brick structure. The building right here is home to Aztec Printing, our neighborhood printer. People are very interested to find out that Blackford Grove only covers about 8, maybe 10 blocks, depending on how you measure them. We got some real weird ones. But within this small area, we have, my last count, 30 businesses, social institutions, churches, community organizations, things like that within our boundaries. But this building is the Philip Mueller building. You see the name up here. It is a commercial vernacular. This is just, you'll see these little stores all over Evansville and the older districts. They are the equivalent of what we see being thrown up today for, Bed Bath & Beyond or, strip malls and things like that. A little better materials sometimes. Some of them have real interesting details that might be simple. But this one was, as I said, built in 1930, but it was rebuilt over an older frame store that dated to 1887. And this strip of shops here was known for many years as Perrette Row. And of course, this area, Haney's Corner, Goosetown, were a major shopping district for the downtown neighborhoods. Now, behind us, as we walk up the street, you'll see a quartet of row houses facing Perrette Street. And up on the corner here, there is a business called the Event Gallery. That is a rental hall run by Madeline's Restaurant down on First Street. It was the Walton Motor Company, an early motor car dealership. Again, it was built in 1930, And those of you with long memories of this neighborhood will remember that that was the old red and white food store. Right up here. Here. That yellow brick is a nice touch. The carved stone squares inside the yellow brick, the different way they've turned those and just added some interesting features to the facade, the nice windows. It's been restored very nicely inside. It's a beautiful facility. But here we are at the Triangle Park, the site of our historic marker. This outlines, marks the time when this was used as a refugee camp during the Civil War. We're talking about from right down here up to Powell, which is that next corner, to Washington, and running all the way down to Garvin Street. That was the orchard, the grove, and that was what served as a refugee camp, mostly for people fleeing from the conflict, which has gotten as far as Western Kentucky, Northern Kentucky, Western Tennessee. And supposedly that's how we got a lot of influx of immigrants from that area of the country. Now, a little bit, I told you a little bit that Judge Blackford never lived here, but he did own the property as speculation, just held on to it. He passed away. His heirs continued to just hold on to it. I guess the orchard or the grove may have been a business proposition, but it was mainly investment. And of course, this was a place where people came for picnics and outings, and was a pleasure spot as well. But what we found out when we were researching the history of this marker, which is probably installed by the Evansville Museum in the early 1960s. We recently had it repaired with the help of Architectural Renovators, which is located in Blackford Grove. It had been demolished by a car, broken up into pieces. We didn't think it could be repaired, but we did it. But we found out that this triangle is actually a memorial to World War I veterans. I have here a photograph that someone found for me showing its dedication back in the early 1920s. And on the back of that, it also shows you a map of the city right before the Blackford Grove orchard was subdivided, and shows you where it actually was located.
Now, is
But-
that still a church at that time?
It looks like it was a church, yeah. But I want to tell you a little bit about how the city developed around this area. The original city was down there, Main Street, developed along the river, along Southeast First Street, that area right there. It jumped along the river, then it went over to Culver, which is south of that way, right in the pocket where Riverside makes that turn. And then it started to develop more over in the Goosetown area over there. This area was undeveloped. Now, what we call Blackford Grove today is actually two different subdivisions of the city. The northern portion on the north side of Powell up to Mulberry is a much older section of Blackford Grove, and that is part of the Western Addition, which was one of the largest annexations in the city history up to that time. So that area was developed first, but all these areas were built up, and all the fashionable streets were built up, and there was no more. So people wanted to build new homes, get out of the congestion, and people who were starting to make money, recent immigrants, successful business people, decided that they were going to push out along Washington Avenue and out that way. And that's how the Washington Avenue area and the area that comprises the National Register Historic District was from probably the last quarter of the 19th century well into the 20th century, was one of Evansville's premier neighborhoods to live in. And it went through a really down cycle for a long period of time. but now it's really on the ascendancy again, as I hope you'll see tonight. Okay, we're going to head up toward the oldest L.M. Baird house, the side of it. It was built in 1865, to the best of my knowledge, just at the end of the Civil War. It is the oldest building in Blackford Grove. Mr. Baird was a produce and grain merchant. The style is Italianate, which is usually brick, is what we're accustomed to seeing Italianate in, but this is a more modest version of it. But it has some of the Italianate features. It has a tall feel to it, especially when you get to the front, but even this little extra bump up in that, that makes that point up there, gives it a little extra added height. We have brackets under the eaves, not as big and deep as you'll see later on in another example. The louvered shutters, I believe, are original to the house. Would not be hard to believe. It has just been purchased and is in the process of being worked on by the new owner. This is one of those houses that still has and runs off the giant octopus furnace in the cellar that's converted to gas. So any of you who have ever lived in a house like with that know what that gas bill is. Street right up here, that is the coach house that goes with this building on the corner right here. Very elaborate, but again, this is an example of the Queen Anne. As we get over there, you'll see the cutaway corners, but it's a bit more transitional, a little more calmed down version. Well, let's cross the street. Additional things on that house, like those columns, are not what you would expect to find on an Italianate house. I don't know if they are replacements or something. But let's look at the Baird house across the street. Again, it has that vertical feel, rather elaborate yet plain porch. Got those brackets there, narrow frame siding, side porch tucked in there. So in a way, it's almost like a gable-elled house or a cross-transit house. This one that's been stuccoed over is a Queen Anne that's had a lot of alteration done. Oh, stop. But you can still see at the top roof line, see the red metal pieces that go across the top of the roof? The original slate roof with the scalloped interspersed with the rectangular, the wrought iron on that little corner protuberance, and the slate up there. And if you look up at the very top, it has the coxcomb on the roof and that elaborate carving around those windows. And again, the shakes up there. So the basic shape and everything of the house is there. Next to it, the brown wooden house is simply a gable front vernacular house. It has an interesting chimney on it, and also I like that little tiny dormer with the eyebrow window, the arched eyebrow window. But you can see the porch is tucked into that side corner. The porch is given a little bit of attention, but for the most part, the rest of the house is just a very plain, simple treatment. William Ross House. It was built in 1914 by F. Manson Gilbert. Mr. Ross was an insurance agent. F. Manson Gilbert was only in Evansville for 10 years. He only worked here from 1908 to 1918. But boy, did he make a big impact on this city. He spent several years and studied in Europe, particularly in Greece and Italy. He was a very accomplished man. When he left Evansville in 1918, he went into military service, and 2 years later entered the Foreign Service, and later served as a diplomat to several European countries until 1941. One of his best known houses is the Clara Karsh House, which is documented in this publication, which you all will receive free copies of at the end of the tour. That's located over in Goosetown. But a little bit more about Gilbert here. Find my... Gilbert also designed a house at 700 Sunset. It sits across from the Evansville Museum. It looks like a Renaissance villa. That was his own home. So he was very prolific and influential during the time that he was here. But Greek, I call this is in the brochure, the publication, this is called Classical Revival. Classical Revival covers a broad range of things: Greek Revival, Tudor Revival, Georgian Revival, Exotic Revival, Neoclassical Revival, blah, blah, blah. But I would know this as a Greek Revival house. In New Orleans, this would be called a raised cottage. Yeah, a raised cottage. But what makes it Greek Revival? Well, Revival architecture, no matter what style it is always very formal. And usually they were designed by architects. But what a Revival style tries to do is either duplicate an actual historic style, replicate, or simply take a lot of inspiration from a style and merge it into something more contemporary.
Looks like the Parthenon.
Yes, it does. That is because it incorporates a lot of Greek design elements. Washington Avenue Historic District has a lot of Greek Revival buildings up and down, the ones with the columns that look like Greek temples. But columns are essential. The Corinthian, the Doric, or the Ionic. The Corinthian are the ones with the acanthus leaves like this. The Doric are the one that have the curlicues that looks like ram's ears coming out the side. And then the Ionian are the really plain ones, the really simple ones. Almost always Greek Revival house is gable fronted, meaning it forms that. That is because they want to get the golden triangle in. That triangle is an exact mathematical proportion that the Greeks found was very pleasing to the human eye. It's called the golden triangle. You have things like dentals carved in to many of them. This one doesn't have it. The Clericarch dentals look like teeth when you look at them. That's why they're called dentals, often up under the eaves or placed in other places. Doors and windows. Symmetry, very important. Balance. A door flanked by two windows here. Usually, Greek Revival houses were framed, were made of wood, usually painted white, and they were designed now so that the wood would look like stone that had been painted. So here, this is obviously broad. I don't think cards will look like stone, but some of them you'll see they have vertical cuts, and they really do, you have to go up and touch and look. But here you have a portico, 4 fluted columns, the pilaster, those thick, heavy verticals around the doors and windows. You have this, that's called a tympanum too. Tympanum, I need a librarian to help me here. Anyway, some of them have really elaborate moldings up there. This one doesn't. There's a lunette window, the half window up there. That is very common. Often you will have case lights around the door, a series of lights going around the door. And then this one is interesting because it does not have the classic Greek key design around the windows. That's just a very simple one. But as you go down Washington Avenue and when you get your booklet, as you explore this area later, you'll see a lot of really good examples. And Paul maintains an urban wildlife habitat here. He raises chickens and has very elaborate gardens. So we can get...
Is the barn in the back?
The barn in the basement. It's not dug very far into the earth because most of it sits above ground. But yeah, there's a basement there. That's why, remember I said in New Orleans they're called raised cottages? That was where your storage area was to keep your food cool and other things, and also to keep you above any flood planing that might come in. Here we have just some nice houses here. This little red asbestos-sided one in Chicago that's called Polish brick. It's simply a gable-fronted house built in 1890. Behind me here we have a real nice example of the Craftsman style, which is early 20th century. This one was built in 1900. This is a duplex. It starts to emerge. It's not quite the American four-square. It starts to bring some of the Frank Lloyd Wright and bungalow element all together. Now, just next door to it, we'll pass the Inglewood Apartments, which is actually dates to 1890. But as you'll see, the facade was altered probably in the 1940s during the Art Moderne area. And next to that is another wildlife habitat. So here we are standing in the middle of Powell Street. This is considered one of the best kept brick street in Evansville. It just runs from this block down to the next. A lot of our all of our alleys are still brick. We have a commitment from the city engineer that they will not tear up any of our brick alleys. We're working with them to do temporary fixes that won't damage the brick, and then eventually we're going to seek funding to actually restore them, because the brick is perfectly serviceable. If it's pulled up, a new bed put down for them, they will last another 150 years. But as you walk around, take a look down our alleys, because you know we call ourselves a village in a city. Part of that is because our alleys are almost like country lanes. They have hedgerows and trees, and we use those as transportation as much as the street. We use alleys a great deal around here. Over here on this side, we have a nice example of the bungalow. This one was built in 1910. It's the gable-fronted version. About in the 1920s, 1930s, they started to turn them on the side so that they could work with them a little differently. But that's your classic bungalow. There's a beautiful section. There are lots of bungalow-villes throughout the city, but there's a really nice section over in the very eastern edge of the Washington Avenue district.
Question. Do we know how high the water got?
This is one of my favorite ones, 34 East Powell. John Duttler built this. It's a little Italianate cottage built in 1870, very early for this area. He was a tobacco merchant, and it has a real English basement, you know, of what we were talking about, the basement raised up high out of the ground. Next to it, at 36 East Powell, is another Italianate house built in 1880. Very somewhat stripped down. I believe that front porch, that brick on that front porch was rebuilt. That's the kind of brick they were using in the 20s and 30s. But behind you, and we'll see the front facade when we head back to Billy's Gallery, is a really wonderful example of Italianate, the Dr. Levi Hare House. He built this in 1883. And Dennis has a note that in some ways it stylistically anticipated Queen Anne. He noted in particular the label moldings over the doors, the windows, I mean. I don't quite see it. It still looks to me very much like pure Italianate. But this is another one of the buildings that received a preservation award back in 1988. And Dennis Au told me last year after going on this tour that he had not realized it before, but the best concentration of really fine Italianate architecture is located in this pocket right here. We've got great examples all over town, but in terms of a concentration of them, they're located right here. We're going to go to 6th Street and then turn left. Right here. Oh dearie.
American Foursquare right here.
Square was built in 1910 for Fred Gumberts. Gumberts were a well-known family here. Over there that gray building over there is the Robert Rustin Jr. house. It's another example of Italianate. It was built in 1882. Mr. Rustin owned a flour mill here in Evansville. And next to that is a Queen Anne house built in 1880. And what's interesting about the Queen Anne house, it's not in very good shape. It's a cheap apartment house right now, but it has that beautiful belvedere at the top. When we get to the corner, you'll be able to see that. This vacant lot right here was the site of the Rosencrantz apartment building, which was constructed in 1910. At the cost of $40,000, it housed 6 families. It had been vacant, abandoned for more than 30 years. There were no more alternatives for redeveloping it. So the neighborhood association asked the city to have it torn down because the blight was starting to reinfect the neighborhood. What they did, however, they salvaged all the beautiful yellow brick, which was one of the things that made it famous. All the stonework, they did a major salvage operation. But from the total cost from doing all the environmental reviews, digging out an old oil well on the property, doing all the remediation, the salvage work, most of which was done by hand, and the demolition came in at $170,000. So, but we have all those materials available for someone who wants to do a new project with them.
Where is it stored?
I'm not sure. The city has several store places around town, probably, Parks Department or who knows. We also lost the last shotgun in Blackford Grove. It was on this lot right here. But a shotgun house is typically was built for the typical lot down in these old areas, or in Lamasco or Jimtown. You go to any, you see these old houses. The lots are 26 feet wide, maybe 30, if you had a big extra wide was 30 feet, and 129 feet deep. So that's what this lot is right here, typical shotgun sized lot. Next door we have 2 lovely bungalows, both gable fronted. Bungalows were very simple. Notice this one has glazed brick on the facade. When they tore down the shotgun, we had a beautiful view of the side and didn't realize that it had all these elaborate stone lintels and window sills. The one next to it is made of a striated brick, which is they take something that comb through the brick before it dries. Some of the later ones have more elaborate, almost craftsman style, real complicated posts and pillars and shingles and shakes and things. But these are very, very plain. Some of the really nice examples, there's one that's talked about in the brochure, has its original clay barrel tile roof, which is really nice.
What identifies the house as a bungalow?
House. It was built around 1872, and Dennis has labeled this as a gabled L Italianate. The house and the stable behind it are virtually unchanged from when it was built. Meyer was a Prussian immigrant and became a well-established attorney and judge, and he was the founder of the German language newspaper, the Evansville Democrat. His great-grandson, Francis Pillard, fought redevelopment plans in 1975 to raise the house, which was called Project B. And that was how, back in this area right back here where we have these contemporary buildings, there were something like 179 houses packed in here that were torn down as part of that redevelopment and around there. And the family was able to stop that from being torn down. Of course, it received a preservation award later, so we're so thankful it was saved.
As I remember this property, there was a possibility that they were trying.
And urban renewal
Right.
was popular. Urban renewal, yeah. But the Italianate, as you can see, this one has all of the examples that we want out of Italianate. It's tall. It looks like a Renaissance villa. The windows have those beautiful prominent hoods that are again made out of pressed copper. Broad eaves, supported by those large brackets. The roof pitch is relatively low. You know, it doesn't go up high like that one behind you across the field. This one is pretty low. The porch posts are turned, but they pick up the same design that's in the brackets. Earth tones are very common for this type of house. I told you a little bit about him. Oh, the other thing I forgot to, he was judge of the Superior Court, and the house did own the family. Family owned this house until 1988. It was placed independently on the National Register of Historic Places in 1982. It has an individual listing. Still has the original fence around it. It's just a wonderful house. I want to talk a bit about modern architecture once again, because one thing that we were lucky when they bulldozed all these houses and put them out for redevelopment, we got some nice modern architecture. These houses, buildings up here on the corner, Four Seas, Vowels and Shaft, which is a title company, and then we have Kindergate here, are all done. They're not just boxy things. They evoke or they pick out, like Kindergate here reminds me of shotgun houses, or just row after row, house after house of little gable fronted houses. And the materials are nice. They break up the brick with older development. So, do you want to cross the street and take a quick peek up close, and then we'll head back down to Billy's place, the gallery down there? Southern Gothic movie. Is that the Brentwood nursing home back here sits on the site of the old cemetery. Originally there was a cemetery somewhere on Main Street, and as the city started to grow they needed to relocate it, so they relocated what was the city's second cemetery right over here. And when you look at some of the early maps, and I have quite a few things back at the house that you can look at, it shows this house just completely surrounded by the old cemetery. So it was kind of eerie. So here it's really dark, but you can see the coach house has all the stylistic elements of the main house. Again, even from the side, the house gives an impression of height.
Do you know what was the boundary lines or whatever? What was the reason for the carriage house being?
Just because of the